Welcome to Dare, the show for startup leaders, innovators, and entrepreneurs who dare to shape the future. Dare is brought to you by the Oregon Entrepreneurs Network, OEN, and Darwaft, the superpower tech team that can make your vision a reality. The Dare Show is excited to welcome Cori Omundson to the show. She's the founder of Rising Wines Collective. She has about 25 years of business experience. She earned her wine production degree as a second career, and she helped lead a company from under $1 million in revenue into $38 million acquisition in about 5 years. So she has great business experience, great wine experience. We're looking forward to hearing more about her winery and how she's revolutionizing things in the wine industry and breaking down barriers so that wine enthusiasts can get what they need right to their door. So, welcome to the show, Cori.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Ned. And I look forward to talking about our passion in supporting small producers and talking about amazing wine.
Well, thank you. So, just to kick off, what does Rising Wines Collective actually do?
So we are a D2C e-commerce marketplace that focuses on exclusively selling wines from small production winemakers. People can shop our site to explore wines from these small producers or join one of our two wine clubs. And we exclusively focus on wines between Washington, Oregon, and California right now. And we've onboarded 30 winemakers, and we now offer two signature brands of our own.
Fantastic. So, how did you get started in this?
Oh gosh, after 25 years of a career in marketing and business growth, over that time I was becoming more and more passionate about wine. And I realized that when I would go wine tasting, I wanted to spend more time back with the winemakers, asking questions about the science behind the wine, why they chose these barrels, where they grow their grapes. And I just couldn't get enough about with it. And I was with my co-founder and I were with our husbands in Walla Walla one weekend for a long weekend. And on our way out, I was like, I have to become a winemaker. It just was an overwhelming experience. And that later that year, I enrolled in wine school. I got my degree in winemaking and enology, and I was just going to simply open a winery and make the best Chardonnay in Oregon. And right about then, when I was looking at my production and buying barrels and grapes and things like that, the pandemic hit. And it just didn't feel like the right time. And my co-founder and I don't live far from each other. And I called her. I was working on my business plan and I found a statistic that shocked me that only 1% of the audience who want to travel to wine country to discover these small wineries or winemakers actually prioritize a trip because life is busy, kids, limited vacation, all kinds of things. And so I became really passionate about wanting to support them because I was like, that means there's 99% of an untapped audience out there that wants easier access to these wines. So this was right when the pandemic hit. So I went over to Sandra's house. She had a big deck. We put a bottle of Chardonnay in the middle and we sat across from the deck from each other and talked through the concept of Rising Wines Collective. And after doing this 3 or 4 times, she has a background in the wine industry and she expressed that she wanted to do this with me. So Sandra she heads up winery relations and she's head of operations. And I've taken on the role of CEO.
Fantastic. Well,
Mhm.
and you've compared yourself in the past to like Etsy or Thrive Market. So, if you could briefly, just for people who aren't in your space, I know you're deeply enmeshed in it. If you could briefly explain how Etsy or Thrive Market disintermediated that world and how you're doing the same thing in Rising Wines.
So when we look at Etsy, Etsy launched with the passion of supporting small craft businesses. And Thrive Market focuses on emerging organic foods. And so that's what that comparison ties into wine because the wine industry is really two different industries, the small production industry and the mass market and mass retail. And I really wanted to create this dedicated sales channel for these small producers, giving them another space to sell their wines because they rely 74% of their sales comes from the tasting room, and they just need support and being able to get out there. And they don't have the budgets for digital marketing, and I think collectively if we work together we can support the small production industry.
Right. So tell us more about that industry. Like, I belong to a couple wineries, so I'm familiar with the winery experience from the consumer side, like as a consumer of great wines, but I'm not familiar with what it's like as a small producer of wine. So, what's their experience like in the world, and what problem are you solving for them?
So I think of these producers as artists, right? A lot of them come into the industry for their passion for the craft. And oftentimes they may not be business people. They're really good at one of their focus in the wineries, but having a small business, you wear many hats and you often don't have a lot of time or budgets for other things. And right now with the small industry, they often hit the road and go out and meet with these boutique wine shops and things like that to introduce their wines. And, the wine industry has sold wine the same way for years. And they've mastered selling wine in the tasting room and creating these romantic experiences or beautiful experiences. And I haven't met an enthusiast that doesn't want to do that. But when they look at reaching outside of the tasting room, that's traditionally has been outside of their focus. And so with the consumers, they love the experience of meeting the winemakers. They love the experience of wine. Often they sign up for the wine clubs from the tasting room, and then they go home with their wine clubs, and they believe that they're going to come back for the winemaker dinners or the release events and things like that. But life is busy and they don't have a chance to get back. And so over time, there can be a the relationship becomes a little disconnected between the winemaker and the consumer. And so one of the things that we wanted to solve for them was to create a wine club that focuses on highlighting and celebrating these different winemakers. And then we create experiences to connect these winemakers with the consumer. And so, for example, with our Shades of Red Wine Club, we built a portal to enhance the consumer experience. And you log in, and there's a music playlist themed with every shipment. There's an on demand video review of each of the wines that tells the story of the winemaker, and then a recipe paired with those wines.
Oh,
And
that's fantastic.
yeah, it's all about the experience for the consumer.
Yeah, but you're providing a real kind of launch pad for a new wine or a new winery. That winery might not have the bandwidth to be able to create themselves, and so you're providing them kind of that launch pad for their wine, right?
Yeah, and as we grow, I hope that we'll have stronger influence in building awareness for these wineries and these wines. And, I honestly believe that there are enough wine drinkers out there and that we're not in competition with these winemakers. We are celebrating them. And so we really also want to promote people who are our customers when they travel, when they actually make it to wine country or plan a trip to go visit these winemakers and have a tasting experience in the tasting rooms.
Right, and so your job, your goal is to send people to those wineries, right?
In the sense of if they plan a trip, we buy the inventory from the winemakers and
Okay.
we work directly with the winemakers and purchase the inventory and then ship those directly to consumers. So one of the things that I think is really valuable for this industry is that we can also focus on sustainable winemaking practices, and we have really strong relationships with these winemakers.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like know your source because there's a lot of bulk wine out there and a lot of generic labels. And I think it's challenging for and consumers today really care about value and they want to feel good about their purchase. So knowing that we're direct from the source, knowing that we can focus on sustainable practices is really important to the consumer. And we also focus on diversity in the industry. So on our site, we have a winemaker section, and in our drop down, there's a community section where you can shop by Black owned or Black winemakers, female winemakers, family owned, female, and we that list will grow as we broaden our range of winemakers that we represent or partner with.
Fantastic. So, to the wineries, I'm asking a leading question here, but I assume wineries really appreciate the platform that you're giving them.
Yeah, when we dug into this and we worked closely with the winemakers and we did some focus groups and some interviews and wanting to know what makes us a really good partner. and what makes it easy for them to work with us. And hands down, they were like, this is no brainer. Of course, we want to work with you. And we have a waiting list of winemakers that want to sell their wine on our site. And we're very particular. We have a really fun process in how we select our wines. And we're very particular on who we work with because we want that relationship with them. It's not a transaction for us. And that's something very unique in the industry. They have a hard time selling into mass retail. And I think this is really interesting. So, over the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a lot of mergers and acquisitions in distribution and mass production. And the top 10 distributors own 85% of the shelf space.
Hmm.
And so that makes it really hard for these small producers to get in to retail, even at in micro markets. And so that is where we support them in being able to partner with them and providing wine.
So that's a fascinating fact, though. The big dogs kind of push everybody else out. So it's
Mhm.
hard to get the shelf space. So
Yeah,
you're
and that's why we talk about the two different sides of the industry, right?
Mhm.
I think they should work together more and promote wine and focus more on consumer experience and what the consumer wants today with the evolution of buying preferences. And if they could do that and work together, I think they could really elevate wine over the competition of other beverages.
Right, and I've read some stats that wine consumption by younger people has been dropping off in comparison to consumption of like energy drinks, which are kind of going through the ceiling. And so this is an industry problem, and your platform, Rising Wines Collective, can actually help address that and raise the profile of wine generally, you're saying.
Yeah. We've done a lot of research on this, and I think it's really important to address ready-made beverages and also non-alcoholic craft beverages. And one of the pieces of research that we found is that in interviewing customers and also in reading research that we found is that consumers who've never drank alcohol are not going to drink alcohol. And now they have options, tasty options that help bring that feeling and experience of having a good beer or a good glass of wine. And but those who are looking for an alternative to a wine, it's not an either or thing. It's maybe they'll start with wine and then towards the end of the night they'll switch over to a non-alcoholic beverage. Or they'll start with a wine at a restaurant and then switch to an alcoholic beverage. And then there's some nights that we just go out to dinner and we just don't feel like drinking and we want another option. But it doesn't necessarily take away from their desire to drink wine.
Right, right. So it's just time shifting when you're drinking it, right?
Mhm, and when you look at the quality of these wines, are these small production wines are about the experience of whether it's food and wine pairings or sitting on the couch eating a pizza and watching a movie, right? Or a movie night without the pizza, like, and it's you made like, my husband and I will often share a bottle, and then we switch over to a non-alcoholic beverage because, we have busy days and during the work week, and we wanna be able to be focused the next day.
Yeah. Well, so we've talked about your platform. We've talked about what you're doing for wineries. We've even talked about changing consumer behavior. But what we haven't talked about is why small wineries should be lifted up. Like, tell me, and maybe this is a leading question for a wine expert, but tell me why I shouldn't just go buy $2 chuck from a vast hoard of grapes that all taste the same. What's the difference when I go for small, unique wineries? How is the taste gonna be different? What's the experience? Why does it
Mhm.
matter?
So this is a really good question and something that I've investigated and spent a lot of time on. So there is wine for everyone. I mean, I think it's 11 stages of your wine journey from someone who's just learning about wine to somebody who has advanced knowledge. And when having a wine business, you really look at where the quality of your wines fit and what consumer you're focusing on. And I'll be honest, we've got some $7 wines on our rack to $150 wines, right? And there's a time for everything. And my husband has a section that he can open up anytime without having to ask me, right? And so, but when it comes down to small producers, I want to talk a little bit about labels too in a second. But when you're looking at small production wine, it is a very pure product, right? You have grapes, you have yeast, and then you have there's sulfites. But one thing that consumers don't realize when sulfites are added to the wine, I think it's like a dried apricot has 3,000 times more sulfites than a bottle of wine. And that can tend to scare consumers off when they don't, unless they know a statistic like that. But it's a quality product and from small producers. And it's not a mass market product or, bulk juice or anything like that. And one thing that I'm really looking forward to is if legislation decides that nutrition or wine labels are required on the back of the bottles or ingredients, right, are required on the back of the bottles because wine really doesn't have that much sugar in it unless the fermentation was stopped early to purposely make it a sweet wine. So most wines are fermented to 0 sugar. It maybe has 5 carbs in the entire glass. And then when we look at the ingredients, it's literally 3 ingredients. And so they won't need to put on QR codes on the back of the labels to call up the full ingredient list. I think it's really gonna be beneficial for the industry, especially with these quality wines, because it will demonstrate the pure aspect of the winemaking and also highlight sustainable winemaking practices, organic, biodynamic, and all of that.
So just as an example, I'm a member of Dominio 4 down in the Dundee area here in Oregon. It's a very small winery, and I almost apologize for mentioning them because I don't want it to become huge. And they've intentionally kept it really small and focused and intimate. And they have really unique varietal grapes that they mix together. They experiment. They do some things that other wineries wouldn't be doing in this region. And so
Mhm,
I feel like with that winery, I'm able to get an experience that I wouldn't have if I was just buying the standard Pinot or the standard
mhm.
thing off the shelf. And that's kind of what you're saying, that you're able to get exposed to a taste palette that goes beyond the kind of average, right?
Yeah, with small producers, they have the flexibility to be able to experiment with their style of wine and their craft, and they have access to different vineyards often with smaller lots of grapes. And then also, like, one thing that I really like about small production is they've got more flexibility in being able to express the terroir and the vintage. So if one year was a cool vintage versus one year was a hotter year, you can really understand the craft and the artistry of a winemaker of making a very difficult growing year and coming out with an incredible wine. And
Mm.
also what I like looking at too is blending because you can make a really good single varietal wine, but also the art of blending and the palette of the winemaker and their team, and then the consumer exploring that it was an intentional profile. And it's fun for myself to explore those blends and like being a Cab Franc dominant versus a Merlot dominant, or even a white blend. It's just fun. It's a creative experience. It's a discovery experience. And that's really about what small production is about.
Right. So the example that I like to use is that when a wildfire swept through Oregon back in 21, I believe it was, 20
Yes.
and
Yeah,
21, then this winery was able to produce a varietal that was smoky and that played with that fact rather than just discarding the entire harvest. And it was a very small batch because not all grapes were good to use for that. But what was interesting was I was able to have a unique taste experience that I wouldn't have from, Chateau Saint Michel or other big producers of wines who wouldn't be able to produce that, small batch run of a special varietal that recalled my experience during that time period.
Yeah, the universities are doing a lot of research, and the wine institutes are doing a lot of research on the effects of smoke paint and on wines. And, when we look at climate change, it's a real thing. And there it may come to time where year after year we're dealing with the challenges of smoke taint. And one of the questions when I was in wine school and we had a debate in one of the classes is, are consumers going to adapt to smoke taint and it's just going to become a profile of some of those wines? Like
Mhm.
sometimes a Cabernet will come across smoky or maybe an older Syrah and that meaty, smoky. And, is that something that could be complemented in that wine? But also with the research that they're doing, they're coming up with affordable ways to extract that smoke taint or to help better protect the grapes in the vineyards. And I'm really excited about the science behind that and the advance. I can't wait to see the advancements that come out of it. But it's something that the industry is seriously looking into, and I'm excited to hear that they came up with a great wine coming out of such a tough time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm so impressed by the inventiveness and the creativity of wineries. You've probably seen a lot of this yourself. Could you speak to any wineries that you've been working with that you've seen be really inventive? Because wineries are all fundamentally startups that happen to have physical grapes to make their product, right?
Yeah, yeah. So, there's a winery here in the Seattle area in the Soto district called T2.
Hmm.
And Todd, the winemaker, he actually ran the wine production facility at the school where I got my degree in winemaking. And so he essentially taught us how to make wine. But we carry his wines on the site. And one of the things that I love about his wines is a lot of times you'll have big Bordeaux style wines in Washington. And I would say his wines are a little lighter, more like a Rhone style or Chateauneuf de Pop style. And I hesitate when I compare it to other regions, but just to give you an idea that his style is a little bit lighter than it's a lighter style than a bigger, heavier Bordeaux style wine.
Hmm.
But he occasionally does these really fun experiences or tests. And so one of them, he made a Viognier, a small batch of Viognier where they aged it in the barrel on the lees. And the lees is essentially the yeast that fermented the grape juice into alcohol.
Hmm.
And when that happens, it's a process where you stir that up in the barrel. It could be daily, it could be weekly, depends on the winemaker style. And it was one of the best Viennese I've ever had in my life, and I keep begging him to make that again. And then he's also really well known for his GSM, and they had some extra so GSM, Grenache, Syrah, and Mourvedre. They had some extra Grenache and Mourvedre, so they decided to test out a blend of just those grapes because they wanted to figure out what to do with the extra juice after making all their wines, and it's a spectacular wine of just the Grenache and Mourvedre. I love it.
Great. Well, it sounds like there are a lot of interesting wineries and interesting experiences that one can find by going to Rising Wines Collective. Sounds like you've hit your initial goal of really giving access to interesting wineries and small batch producers. And what's next for you at Rising Wines?
Oh gosh, I'm really excited for what's ahead. We just officially rolled out our wine clubs in August, and we have 2 wine clubs, Shades of Red, which I mentioned earlier, which is all reds quarterly, and then we have another wine club called Vine Curious, which is bi-monthly shipments of different types of wine, so red, white, rosé, and sometimes sparkling. So we're really excited about that, bringing variety and making discovery easier of these winemakers. And then, we're new, so not a lot of people know about us. So I'm excited to share these wines with the country eventually.
Fantastic. So, how do people find out more about Rising Wines and where should they go? Give us all
Yes,
the pointers.
check out risingwinescollective.com.
Okay.
And for those today listening to the podcast, I'd love to offer a discount code Wine Love. And so for your first purchase, I believe it's a 30% discount.
Fantastic. Well, all you startup junkies out there and who drink wine, take note of this discount code and check out risingwinescollective.com. Thank you so much, Corey. Interesting conversation. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thanks to our guests today for their insights into the entrepreneurial ecosystem. We wish you all the best in your startup journey. The Dare Show is brought to you by the Oregon Entrepreneurs Network and by Darwaf, the superpower tech team that can make your vision a reality. Visit us at oen.org or at darwaf.io. Thanks again for listening. Till next time.